The golden autumn light filtered through the high windows of the Sterling estate, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, but the silence in the kitchen felt heavier than usual, suffocating, even. Marcus Sterling stood behind the high-backed velvet chair where his 8-year-old daughter, Maya, sat perfectly still. At 45, Marcus was a man accustomed to the noise of Wall Street and the hum of high-tech servers, but here, in the sanctuary of his home, he moved with the gentle precision of an artist. His large, steady hands worked through Maya's thick, natural curls, sectioning them for the braids she wore every week. This was their ritual, a sacred time for a single father to connect with his daughter, to remind her of the beauty in her heritage before sending her out into a world that might not always see it. "You're tense today, princess," Marcus said softly, his voice a low rumble. He carefully slid a gold bead onto the end of a braid, the faint click echoing in the quiet room. "Is the math test still bothering you?" Maya shook her head, a micro-movement that barely disturbed his work. "No, Daddy. I'm fine." Her voice was polite, too polite. It lacked the bubbling energy she used to have just a few months ago. Marcus frowned, studying her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her uniform was pristine, not a wrinkle in sight, and her posture was rigid. She didn't look like a child getting ready to learn. She looked like she was armoring herself. They moved to the kitchen, a sprawling space of granite and stainless steel that felt too large for just the two of them. On the counter sat her open lunchbox. Marcus reached for the thermos he had prepared earlier. Inside was his mother's signature seafood gumbo, rich, spicy, and filled with the warmth of the South. It was his way of packing a hug for her lunch break, a reminder of family and love. "Grandma's recipe," Marcus said, placing the thermos inside with a wink. "It'll keep you warm. The weather says it's going to drop to 40 degrees today." Maya stared at the thermos. For a second, Marcus thought he saw a flash of panic in her dark eyes, but it vanished so quickly he wondered if he had imagined it. She didn't argue. She didn't complain. She simply nodded and zipped the bag shut, effectively sealing away the scent of spices that seemed to make her flinch. A memory from the night before pricked at Marcus's mind. He had been walking past her bedroom door late, intending to check on her, when he heard a whisper. It wasn't a request for a pony or an A on her report card. Through the crack in the door, he had heard Maya's trembling voice. "Dear God, please help me be invisible today. Please don't let them notice me." He had frozen in the hallway, hand hovering over the doorknob, unsure of what to make of it. Was it just childhood shyness? Anxiety about speaking in class? Looking at her now, picking at her toast with mechanical movements, that prayer felt less like a wish and more like a plea for survival. "Maya," he started, leaning against the counter. "You know you can tell me anything, right? If something is wrong." "I know, Daddy," she interrupted gently, sliding off the stool. She shouldered her backpack, adjusting the straps until they were perfectly even. She looked up at him, and for a moment, the facade cracked, revealing a deep, weary sadness that no 8-year-old should possess. Then she forced a smile, a small, tight expression that didn't reach her eyes. "I have to go. I don't want to be late." She turned and walked toward the foyer, her chin held high, her steps measured and deliberate. She wasn't skipping. She wasn't running. She was marching. As the heavy oak door closes behind her, Marcus is left with a chilling realization echoing in the empty hall. His daughter wasn't excited for school. She was bracing herself for survival. In the glass-walled corner office of Sterling Solutions, Marcus commanded the attention of the city's top executives, yet his mind was drifting miles away, stuck in a third-grade classroom. Around him, the hum of high-tech servers and the crisp click of presentation remotes created a symphony of efficiency, but Marcus couldn't hear it. He stared at the quarterly projection chart projected on the smart glass, but instead of rising profits, he saw the rigid set of Maya's shoulders as she had walked out the door that morning. "Mr. Sterling?" Regarding the merger timeline. His assistant, Sarah, prompted gently, noticing his distant gaze. Marcus blinked, pulling himself back to the present. He looked down at his platinum watch, then at the untouched coffee on his desk. A sudden, sharp memory from the previous evening pierced through the corporate fog. He had been cleaning up after dinner when he opened Maya's lunchbox to wash it. He expected it to be empty. Instead, the thermos was heavy. Inside, The gumbo he had packed that morning, the one meant to be a warm hug, was cold and untouched. Worse, she had tried to hide it by burying it deep in the kitchen trash can beneath a layer of paper towels, hoping he wouldn't check. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The prayer to be invisible, the soldier-like march to school, the hidden food. It wasn't just childhood anxiety. It was a strategy. Maya wasn't just shy. She was actively trying to disappear. He looked around his office, at the awards lining the shelves and the panoramic view of the city's skyline. He had built this empire to give her everything he never had. The best zip code, the best uniform, the best opportunities. But sitting here in his Italian suit, Marcus realized that his wealth had become a gilded cage, shielding him from the reality she faced alone every day. "Cancel it," Marcus said abruptly, his voice cutting through the room's low murmur. Sarah paused, stylus hovering over her tablet. "The merger meeting? Sir, the investors are flying in from. Cancel everything for this afternoon. Tell them it's a family emergency." Marcus stood up, buttoning his jacket with a decisiveness that brooked no argument. "Because it is." He didn't wait for a response. He grabbed his car keys and strode out, leaving a room full of stunned executives in his wake. The drive to Oak Haven Elementary took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. The autumn rain had started to fall, turning the picturesque New England streets into a gray blur. Marcus parked his sleek black sedan in the visitor's lot, the car looking out of place amidst the line of minivans and SUVs. He walked to the main entrance, the rain drumming a restless rhythm against his umbrella. Inside, the school smelled of floor wax and damp coats. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, barely looked up as he approached. "May I help you?" she asked, her tone carrying the practiced indifference of a gatekeeper. "I'm Marcus Sterling. I'm here to have lunch with my daughter, Maya." The woman peered over her glasses, her eyes flickering to a clipboard. "Do you have an appointment, Mr. Sterling?" Parents are usually required to give 24 hours notice for visitation. It's school policy. Marcus felt a flash of irritation, but he tamped it down. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the counter. He didn't raise his voice, but he let the weight of his presence, the same presence that closed billion-dollar deals, fill the small space. "My daughter is 8 years old," he said, his voice calm, deep, and immovable. "I don't need an appointment to ensure she is okay. I need a visitor's badge. Now." The receptionist hesitated, flustered by the sudden shift in authority. She quickly printed a badge and slid it across the counter without another word about policy. Marcus pinned it to his lapel and turned toward the double doors at the end of the hall. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. He pushed open the heavy doors of the cafeteria, expecting to see his daughter's happy face, but the wall of deafening noise and the distinct, overwhelming smell of institutional food hit him with a wave of nausea and immediate foreboding. The cafeteria was a cacophony of shrieks and clattering trays, a chaotic sea of children. But to Marcus's eyes, the entire room seemed to center around one lonely table in the far corner. The noise was deafening, a mix of laughter and shouting that bounced off the linoleum floors, but Marcus moved through it like a ghost, blending into the background near a wall decorated with finger paintings. He spotted her almost immediately. Maya sat alone at a round table meant for 6. Her posture was the same as it had been at breakfast, shoulders hunched, head down, trying to occupy as little space as possible. She was slowly unscrewing the lid of her thermos. Steam curled up, carrying the rich, savory scent of the seafood gumbo. To Marcus, it smelled like home, like his mother's kitchen on a Sunday. But here, in this sterile environment, it was a beacon. A group of 3 boys, led by a taller kid with messy blonde hair, walked past her table. They didn't just pass by, they slowed down, circling like sharks. What is that smell?" the blonde boy Jason announced loudly, his voice cutting through the chatter nearby. He pinched his nose theatrically. "It smells like swamp water. Did your dad scoop that out of a drain?" Maya didn't look up. She kept her eyes fixed on her spoon, her knuckles white as she gripped it. "It's gumbo," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Gumbo?" "More like gumno," another boy sneered. He reached out and flicked one of the gold beads on her braids. Click. "And why does your hair have plastic in it? You look like a Christmas tree." Marcus felt a surge of heat rise up his neck, a primal protective instinct flaring in his chest. He took a step forward, ready to intervene, but then he froze. Standing just 10 feet away, leaning against a pillar, was Mrs. Vance. The teacher was right there. She was close enough to hear every word, close enough to see Jason leaning over Maya's food. Marcus watched, waiting for her to step in, to reprimand them, to do something. Instead, Mrs. Vance looked up, her eyes sweeping over the scene. She saw Jason. She saw Maya shrinking into herself. And then deliberately she looked down at her phone, taking a slow sip of her coffee. She swiped on her screen, choosing the comfort of scrolling over the discomfort of protecting his daughter. The shock of it hit Marcus harder than the insults. The bullying was cruel, but the silence of the adult was a betrayal. "Oops," Jason said with mock innocence. He stumbled forward, his hip checking the edge of Maya's tray. The thermos tipped. The red-brown stew spilled across the table and onto the pristine white sleeve of Maya's uniform. The boys laughed, a sharp, cruel sound, before sauntering away to their own table. Maya didn't cry. She didn't yell for a teacher. She didn't look surprised. She simply grabbed a handful of coarse brown napkins and began to wipe up the mess, her head bowed in practiced shame, as if she were the one who had made a mistake. Marcus's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his fingernails digging into his palms. Fury, hot and blinding, roared in his ears. He took a furious step forward, ready to storm across the room, to demand answers, to pull his daughter out of this toxic place. But just as he moved, Maya looked up. Across the crowded, noisy cafeteria, her dark eyes locked with his. There was shock in her expression, then fear. She gave a tiny, desperate shake of her head, a silent, pleading communication between father and daughter. "Please, Daddy," her eyes begged. "Don't make a scene. Don't make it worse." Marcus halted mid-stride, his heart breaking in his chest. He stood paralyzed, torn between the rage of a father and the desperate wish of his daughter to just survive the moment. The polished oak door of Principal Pendergast's office closed with a soft click, shutting out the distant noise of the playground, but the silence inside felt colder and more hostile than the biting autumn wind. The room smelled of old paper and stale coffee, a stark contrast to the fresh, modern air of Marcus's corporate headquarters. Marcus sat in a leather chair that was positioned just slightly lower than the principal's, a subtle power play he recognized immediately from boardroom negotiations. Across from him sat Principal Pendergast, a man in his 50s with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. In the corner, Mrs. Vance sat on a folding chair, staring intently at her hands, refusing to meet Marcus's gaze. "I understand you're upset, Mr. Sterling," Pendergast said, clasping his hands on his mahogany desk. His voice was smooth, patronizing. "But I assure you, we pride ourselves on inclusivity here at Oakhaven." "Inclusivity," Marcus repeated, his voice dangerously low. "I just watched 3 boys call my daughter's lunch swamp water and touch her hair like she was a petting zoo animal. And I watched your teacher," he gestured to Mrs. Vance, who flinched, "check her email instead of stopping it." Pendergast sighed, offering a sympathetic tilt of his head that felt entirely rehearsed. He pushed a box of tissues toward Marcus, a gesture meant to frame Marcus as the emotional, irrational parent. "Children can be curious, Mr. Sterling. Sometimes, what looks like bullying is simply a cultural misunderstanding. They aren't used to certain textures and smells." Pendergast leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Perhaps for the sake of harmony, it would be better if Maya brought lunches that were a little less aromatic. We want her to fit in, don't we? We don't want to give other children a reason to isolate her." Marcus felt the blood freeze in his veins. There it was. The polite dismissal. The subtle blame. It's not the bully's fault. It's the victim's fault for being different. They weren't asking the other kids to be kind. They were asking Maya to be less black. He looked at Mrs. Vance. She was trembling slightly, biting her lip. She knew it was wrong. But she was afraid of Pendergast, afraid of the wealthy parents of the bullies, afraid of rocking the boat. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. It protected the comfort of the majority at the expense of his daughter's dignity. Marcus stood up slowly. He buttoned his bespoke suit jacket with deliberate precision. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten to sue. He simply leaned over the desk, invading Pendergast's personal space just enough to shatter the man's composure. "My daughter is not the problem, Mr. Pendergast," Marcus said, his voice steel. "And I am not asking you to fix her. I am telling you to fix your school. Do not mistake my silence for acceptance." He turned and walked out before Pendergast could stutter a reply. In the hallway, Marcus's hands were shaking with suppressed rage. He needed a plan. He needed leverage. As he passed the community bulletin board near the exit, a bright yellow flyer caught his eye. "School Board Town Hall tonight. Topic: Budget and Community Standards." Marcus ripped the flyer off the wall and shoved it into his pocket. His eyes narrowed. They wanted to talk about community standards. Fine. He would give them a standard they wouldn't forget. The school gymnasium smelled of floor wax and old sweat, filled with the low murmur of parents settling into metal folding chairs, unaware that the evening's routine agenda was about to be shattered. Bright, harsh fluorescent lights beat down on the polished floor, exposing the scuffs and scratches of 1,000 games, much like the cracks in the school's reputation that were about to be revealed. Marcus sat in the third row, his hand wrapped protectively around Maya's smaller one. She wore her favorite yellow dress, her braids neat and precise, but her eyes were darting around the room, expecting judgment. Up on the stage, Principal Pendergast adjusted the microphone stand, his smile tight. He launched into a droning report about budget allocations and new playground equipment, deliberately pacing the meeting to leave little time for the open forum at the end. When Pendergast finally asked, "Are there any community concerns?" he looked at his watch, ready to adjourn. Marcus stood up. The metal chair legs scraped loudly against the floor. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the room. "That's Marcus Sterling, the CEO. Is he donating money?" Marcus walked to the microphone in the center aisle. He didn't button his jacket this time. He looked tired, not like a titan of industry, but like a father who hadn't slept. "My name is Marcus," he began, his voice amplified, filling the cavernous space. "I'm not here as a donor. I'm here as Maya's dad." He looked down at his daughter, then back at the sea of faces. "Yesterday, I packed my mother's seafood gumbo for my daughter's lunch. It's a recipe that has been in our family for 4 generations. It represents survival, love, and pride." He paused, his voice trembling slightly. "But in this school's cafeteria, it was called swamp water. My daughter was told she smelled. She was touched without permission. And she prayed to God to make her invisible so she wouldn't have to face it again." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Pendergast stepped forward on stage, his face flushing red. "Mr. Sterling, while we appreciate your passion, individual student matters should be discussed in priv. I tried private." Marcus's voice boomed, cutting him off. "And I was told she needed to be less aromatic to fit in. I was told my daughter's existence was disrupting your harmony." "Mr. Sterling, your time is up," Pendergast snapped, signaling for the audio technician to cut the mic. The sound system whined and went dead. The room hung in a precarious balance. Pendergast smirked, thinking he had won. Then a chair scraped in the front row. Mrs. Vance stood up. She was shaking. Her hands gripped the back of the chair in front of her, so hard her knuckles were white. She looked at Pendergast, then at Marcus, and finally at Maya. "Let him finish," Mrs. Vance said. Her voice was unamplified, but in the stunned silence, it carried to the back of the room. "Mrs. Vance, sit down," Pendergast hissed. "No," she said, tears spilling over her cheeks. She turned to face the parents. "He's right. I was there. I saw the boys circling her table. I heard what they said." She took a shuddering breath. "And I looked at my phone because I was afraid. I was afraid of the paperwork. I was afraid of the parents. I chose my comfort over a child's dignity." Her confession hit the room like a thunderclap. It broke the dam. A black mother in the back stood up. "My son comes home crying every Tuesday because of his accent." A white father stood up. "My daughter told me about the invisible table in the cafeteria, but I thought she was making it up." One by one, parents stood. The harmony Pendergast had preached was revealed to be a silence bought at the cost of their children's pain. Pendergast stood frozen on stage, his authority evaporating as the room turned against him. Marcus looked down. Maya wasn't shrinking anymore. She was looking at Mrs. Vance, then at the standing parents, her eyes wide with wonder. She squeezed Marcus's hand, and for the first time in months, she sat up straight, realizing she wasn't invisible anymore. She was seen. Monday morning arrived with a crisp breeze that stripped the last dead leaves from the oak trees lining the school driveway, but the heavy fog of dread that had hung over the Sterling household seemed to have finally lifted. Inside the kitchen, the silence was gone, replaced by the rhythmic chopping of vegetables. Maya sat at the island, swinging her legs. She wasn't marching like a soldier today. She was just a little girl. "Ready?" Marcus asked, handing her the lunchbox. Inside was the gumbo. They hadn't changed the menu to please the bullies. They had kept it as a badge of honor. "Ready?" Maya said. And this time, she smiled, a real one that crinkled the corners of her eyes. The atmosphere at Oakhaven Elementary had shifted. It was subtle, but palpable. Principal Pendergast was conspicuously absent, replaced by an interim administrator who greeted students at the door by name. Mrs. Vance was back in the cafeteria, but her phone was nowhere in sight. She moved between tables, actively engaging, her face looking lighter, unburdened by the weight of her previous silence. When lunch period began, Marcus stood quietly near the kitchen entrance, just out of sight. He needed to see it one last time to be sure. Maya walked to her table. She sat down and placed her thermos on the surface. She took a deep breath and unscrewed the lid. The savory scent of seafood and spices wafted up, drifting toward the nearby tables. For a heartbeat, the old tension returned. Marcus held his breath. Then, a boy from the next table, one who had laughed along with Jason last week, stood up. He walked over, looking curious rather than cruel. "My mom saw your dad on the news," the boy said, eyeing the thermos. "She said that's Cajun food. Is it really spicy?" Maya looked at him, surprised. She glanced at Mrs. Vance, who gave her an encouraging nod. "A little," Maya said. "But it's good spicy. Wanna try?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. Maya poured a small amount into the thermos cap and handed it to him. He took a sip, blinked, and then grinned. "Whoa, that's way better than my sandwich." Laughter rippled at the table, not the sharp, jagged laughter of mockery, but the warm, bubbling sound of connection. From the serving line, Miss Betty, the elderly lunch lady who had seen it all, caught Marcus's eye. She gave him a slow, firm thumbs up. That evening, the city skyline glittered outside Marcus's office window, a testament to his empire. But his attention was focused entirely on a piece of notebook paper lying on top of a billion-dollar merger contract. It was a drawing Maya had given him after school. It depicted a lion with a thick, braided mane, wearing a suit. Underneath, in her neat third-grade cursive, she had written, "Daddy, you didn't make me invisible. You made me brave." Marcus traced the letters with his finger. He had spent his life chasing success, thinking power was the ultimate shield. But as he looked at the drawing, he realized the truth. His money hadn't saved his daughter. His voice had. And more importantly, it had taught her to find her own. He picked up the drawing and placed it in the center of his desk, the most valuable document he owned. Marcus Sterling leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and finally, deeply, exhaled. The war was over. And they had won not by fighting, but by refusing to hide. Marcus and Maya's journey reminds us that the strongest walls of prejudice aren't brought down by power or wealth, but by the quiet courage to speak the truth. True leadership isn't about standing above others. It is about standing beside those who feel invisible and letting them know they are seen. As we go about our week, may we all find the bravery to break the silence and share our table with someone waiting to be welcomed.